Good evening. Even if outside we still have sunlight, but we are almost approaching the evening. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you all at another meeting as a part of a Curating Institution project run by the CCA Ujazdowski Castle. Tonight's lecture will be provided by Mr. Bartomeu Mari, the Director of National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in South Korea. I'm very pleased that Bartomeu Mari accepted our invitation after a long journey from the first email to the last. I'm glad that we can host you in Warsaw tonight. And briefly, I will introduce our guest. It's my privilege to host him tonight. Bartomeu Mari is an author, curator of international renown. Since 2015, he is a director of National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Korea. He served as a director of the Museum of Contemporary Art of Barcelona between 2008 and 2015, and previously he was a chief curator and head of an exhibition department at MACBA from 2004 to 2008. He served as well as a director of Vita de Witt Center of Contemporary Art in Rotterdam, Holland from 1996 to 2001. So as you already see, we are hosting a very special person with a long experience with contemporary art. And tonight's lecture will be very special as we will be introduced to the institution with very special meaning and special position in South Korea. So without further ado, Bartomeu, if I can have you here, and the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Schiller, for the introduction, and thank you, Director Ludwisiak, for the invitation, and to all of you for your presence. I will try to in the next more or less hour to explain some basic facts of the museum, which is, as I hope I will be able to explain, one of the pioneering institutions of its kind in Asia, and by now one of the biggest museums also of its kind in the world, if we add the different venues, the different buildings that are being operated currently. I hope I will do so in a dynamic manner, so that it contributes to stimulate the conversation afterwards about not only the facts but especially the ideas that we are trying to impulse and promote at the museum. The title of this presentation is especially appropriated because nowadays curating is a big word that has to do with creativity, with innovation, with management, with administration, with public affairs, and institutions are, especially public institutions, are something very important for the life of a community, for the life of democratic society. So I believe that the museums are an essential institution in that in those democratic societies, and I hope that I will be able to explain a little bit why that is so. I believe that what is the here maybe? No. What is? Okay, here. Yeah. Okay. In some of the chairs you have the a little leaflet that explains the program of this year, and that it makes it also, I will refer to some of the exhibitions, recent exhibitions that we have organized in order to define or to try to communicate the identity of not only the museum but also of the Korean art, which is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting contexts, creative contexts in Asia and in the world. And I'm not trying to be polite here with my country of adoption. It is my real conviction that the Korean culture, Korean contemporary art is extraordinarily attractive for many reasons. Some basic facts. The museum, as I said, was created in, maybe I didn't say it, it was created in 1969. Next year we will celebrate our 50th anniversary, and it has a large team of around 300 people with about 30 curators of different specialties, and we are managing currently 3 different buildings with a 4th one under preparation, scheduled to be opened at the end of this year. Oops, sorry, why here? This represents the location of the 3 of our currently existing buildings, plus 2 artists in residence programs that we are also managing on behalf of the Ministry of Culture. 2 of them are located in the center of Seoul. This is what you would call downtown, and we'll have some images of each building. MMCA Gwacheon is located outside of the municipality of Seoul, but in metropolitan Seoul still. I go there by subway. This is my official office, because since 1986, when the museum was opened here, this is the official, let's say, the headquarters. MMCA Doksugung was, and we'll see images in a moment, was given to the museum in the early 90s. MMCA Gwacheon is 1986, and MMCA Seoul opened to the public in 2013. I think I have a slide with some basic data as well about square meters and a gallery space. Normally this is very boring, and I don't like to confuse or to mistake the identity of an institution with a building. And I don't care how big or how small the galleries are, but the data is important, because managing 3 different buildings of that dimension makes my job a really challenging one, and I experience it as a total privilege. I have to say that I'm the first non-Korean director of a national institution, and for many reasons, including that one, I consider this to be an absolute privilege that I hope it certainly motivates me enormously to do a good job. Okay, just some images of. So in my introduction, I will mention the buildings, a little bit of their history, in order to understand what we do, and we'll see some exhibitions recently, and then I will try to focus on more or less what am I trying to do, how am I curating the institution named National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. This is a view of the Doksugung Palace. The palace looks like a park. In fact, it's full of trees, and these different buildings did host the functions typical of a palace in the Joseon dynasty, which is the longest dynasty that managed Korea, managed the government of Korea until the Japanese occupation in 1910 and before becoming a republic after the liberation in 1945. Now, the last king of the Joseon dynasty did something very interesting at the end of the 19th century in 1896, I believe, and I might be not precise and exact in dates, but I think it's the end of the 19th century. He declared Korea to be an empire in order to also protect it from the constant attempts to invade it, mainly from China. And China was an empire, so he commissioned a British architect his new modern residency. And you see here this kind of neoclassical building that was the first building made in stone in Seoul. Normally the traditional architecture has a base of stone, but it mainly uses wood. And this building is known popularly as the stone building, Sokjojeon. And in 1938, after the death of the king or the emperor, the Japanese government, then administrating the territory of Korea among other occupied territories in Asia, decided to build here the first museum of modern art. And they built this building here. Maybe we have another image here. Yes, this is an image of the facade. But in the residency of the emperor, they displayed Japanese modern art, and we will see that at the end of my presentation, because this is the subject of an exhibition that will open very soon at the Doksugung wing. This is the extension they built to the house of the king that was that would display Japanese modern art. And in here, the Japanese government displayed Korean archaeological artifacts and craft with a very clear colonial message of saying Japan is the future, Korean culture is the past. Here is where we organize our exhibitions of modern art, and this is a very, we can come back to this problem later on. The definition of modern art in the Korean context cannot follow the canons that we use in the West. But we'll go back to it at the end. This is an aerial view of the Gwacheon building. This is in Seoul Grand Park. It was opened to the public in 1986. It is very big, more than 50,000 square meters of built space. And I just go through some of the images for you to understand the context. In 1986 was the year of the Asian Games that preceded the 1988 Olympic Games that took place in Seoul, and that precede as well a very important year in the timeline, in the modern history of Korea, in the contemporary history of Korea. 1989 has a big meaning, like in Poland and like in many other countries around here. So this building is an expression of a very important moment of change in the Korean society, in the Korean culture, in the Korean politics. And at that time, if I'm not wrong, the museum was built here because someone gave the land to build it here. It's something you wouldn't do probably today. You don't build, I mean, normally nowadays museums are built in the center of town. But in 1986 they built it here. It takes about 1 hour to get here from the center of Seoul. It's very well connected by subway and public transportation. And it is within, as we will see, a very interesting compound with different functions. Around the museum there is a sculpture park, which is an idea when I first encountered it. This is an aerial view of the compound. The museum is here, if I'm not wrong, here. A lake, a water reservoir. This is in the city, in the municipality of Gwacheon, that manages some of the water reservoirs for metropolitan Seoul. The subway station is here, and there are a number of recreational facilities here. There is an amusement park in here, Seoul Land. It's really crazy on weekends, especially spring, summer, and fall. There are gardens and the lake and a zoo and campings. When I realized all of these, I made an exhibition in 2010. I made an exhibition of the collections of Magba in this building, but I never realized this was so crazy. I mean, it's really. So when I make a little parenthesis, I was appointed in December 15. I took office on December 15, 2015, and. After meeting the minister, I was brought to my headquarters here, and in the next days I went to visit Doksugung Palace, which I didn't know, I had not visited in 2010, and then I went to the Seoul venue that we will see in a minute, and I had been there in 2014 when I was visiting but looking at everything as a director, they showed me everything and all the facilities, and I told my assistant when I had understood the complexity of it all, I said, when we program all of these 100% at the same time, it is going to be like curating documenta 24/7. Documenta is every 5 years, and it lasts for 3 months. But I suddenly had the impression that when we put all of this at work together at the top of its possibilities, MMCA is like Documenta, but every day. These are, you probably can't, I mean, I myself can even read the names but these are the different works of the sculpture park. They're very eclectic. They're too many, in my opinion, but I'm not going to take any away. I thought about it, but then I thought, you're not going to do it. I even thought it looks anachronistic, out of place, but instead of trying to fix it, let's even increase it. So I put in my program, let's commission new artists to do public works in the context of the entire Seoul Grand Park that I showed the image before, and the Korean government gave us the budget. So we're working on it. Of course, it goes much more slowly than what I wished, but these are some of the examples of these works that are in front, around, behind the museum. And as you can see, there are different languages, there is no, I would say there is no curatorial, I don't see any curatorial logics behind it. There are works of many different materials, languages, styles, and it makes it, in my point of view, even if in the beginning I thought it was completely anachronistic, now I think it's one of the great potentials. This is Seoul Kwan. So this is the Seoul venue. Here is the, and you have it in the leaflet. There is a more detailed plan, if you're interested. This is the Gyeongbogung Palace. This used to be the big center of power during for a long time. Even in our compound, which the museum, it's all this area here, and even this was part of the apparatus of the palace. This was a sort of an office of the palace for the, it was a sort of registration office. Now, here what's important to begin with is this building. This is a 1928 military hospital built also, of course, under the Japanese occupation, and maybe it's not very visible, but this is a very beautiful example of international style architecture. It's kind of Bauhaus-like, rationalistic red brick building, and this was built as a military hospital. After the Korean War, all this area that is now the museum was a prison managed by the secret services, the Korean secret services. So this area is also the stage of a dark page of the Korean modern history. A lot of people were tortured and killed here. War. In 2013, late 2013, this opened as the third venue of the National Museum. We will see some of the spaces inside, but this is one of the modern buildings from the Japanese period that is kept. There was a lot of polemics at the time of whether this was a successful operation in the sense of managing heritage, contemporary and modern architecture. This area here, and continuing on that side, is called Bukchon, which means north of the palace. And this road is one of the main access to the Blue House, which is the residency of the President of the Republic of Korea. The candlelight rallies that started at the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017, and that led also to the change of the government, took place mainly in front of the Gyeongbogung Palace over here, in the Gwanghwamun Avenue that leads to the Doksugung Palace. Anyway, that's maybe too specialized, but this is in the middle of the apparatus of the public space in today's Seoul, and not only the historical part, but also what surrounds the museum is really the stage of big transformations that we have witnessed in the Korean society recently. A few words about the building. It's composed, in its appearance, it's composed of several public squares, or madang in Korean. I think square is a public space, is the translation of that word. You have a big one here. This is a terrace with grass. You have a subterraneous one here that goes, on the ground. There is another one here. There is a big terrace here. There is another square here. So the building in itself, it's like a portion of the city. It's like a neighborhood. You will go into the corridors inside, and you will feel like you are in a covered street. And some of the galleries are so big it looks like buildings. So these are some views that allow you to understand this idea that the architect has a very beautiful metaphor to describe the building. he says that this building is like an archipelago, a group of islands that are close to each other. Now, because where there are three, there could be four. This is an image of the MMCA Cheongju that is supposed to open at the end of this year as the National Storage and Conservation Center. The city of Cheongju is located more or less at the center of the southern part of the Korean peninsula. It's not far away from the Sejong, that is the administrative city of the Korean government. And the MMCA Cheongju, if I'm not wrong, uses only this wing. This was a former cigarette factory built in the 60s and is being now adapted for the purpose of the national storages. So I accelerate a bit because I consumed a lot of time in the fact description. We're gonna look at some images from exhibitions that are already part of my program and that deal or try to express the reasons also that brought me or that brought the Korean Ministry of Culture to hire a foreigner for this position. My contract states three main objectives in my mandate. One is to make MMCA top-level world international museum. The second is to make MMCA to be more central, to have more relevance in the cultural life of the Korean society. And the third one is to make a tangible, visible contribution to the internationalization of the Korean art scene. And one of the first ideas that I proposed is that internationalizing, making the Korean art scene more international could not be reduced to a factor of export. It had to be based on the idea that the Korean art scene would be very international in itself. So making our program international is also was also a very clear priority. Reenacting History is an exhibition that was shown at the end of last year, and it brought together about 20 artists from different generations, from different areas of the world, especially also, and that is another of my priorities, bringing together artists from different Asian contexts. In my opinion, before becoming crazy about becoming totally global, our museum has to be international. And that means that we have to pay attention to our region. And our region is Asia. There is no museum, maybe in Japan, I think is in Fukuoka, there is a museum that has the notion of Asianness in its policy, but the discourse on Asian art is being elaborated as it used to be in the traditional centers of power, United States and Europe, mainly. I think Tate has a very clear vision and policy about representing Asia. LACMA in Los Angeles and the Asia Society in New York have also very clear identity based on that interrogation, what is Asian art nowadays? And I thought MMCA should be the museum in Asia that leads that process as well of understanding our own surrounding. Here are, Reenacting History brought together, as I said, about 20 artists from Korea, Japan, China, and Philippines, Indonesia, and also some Western artists like Marina Abramovic, but it was the name of a Dutch artist now escapes me. Hito Steyerl was represented, and was very successful in looking at history from the 60s until now, but also in commissioning, producing, and exhibiting new works by Korean artists that did fabulous works for that occasion. And here you see, and I was explaining to Director Ludwigsak and Mr. Schiller this morning, this is part of the work of Im Minuk, a very interesting Korean artist that did a work based on a song that is still associated with the promotion of communism in South Korea. So it's a bit problematic. It's a song that it has many different meanings in different cultures. It is mainly associated with Christmas in the West. But and this is a work by Ai Weiwei. It was not, and there was also work by Zhang Wang and many others. It was not usual to find works by Chinese artists or Japanese artists in the past years of program of the museum. Another exhibition that was at Doksugung Palace, The Arrival of New Woman, tried to show a very interesting episode of the Korean modern history through art and mass media of the time, and the time is the beginning of the 20th century. It looks at a very interesting phenomenon, and that is the emergence of a new social actor in the Korean society, that is women, new social actor in the public space. Until the early 20th century, women were recluded they were segregated from men, not only in public space, but also in most of the domestic space. They were separated. Women were only allowed to go into the street between midnight and 4 a.m. in the morning, when men were not allowed. So that segregation broke up in the early 20th century, and it allowed, as I said, that emergence of a social actor that came also with a new aesthetics. The new aesthetics is comprehensively under the Japanese occupation. It concerns the introduction of, and again, the images that don't allow. I don't have details of these pictures, but it represents the incorporation of Western fashion and short hair, watch in the wrist, and makeup, and social habits. Women started to work. Of course, Korean women did not have the good jobs that were reserved to the Japanese, but the transformation begins in the 30s, and these are magazines of the time, magazines for women. So obviously the market, media identifies women as consumers already at the time. And of course the first women begin to be represented in a different way. This is what the art is showing, and women artists appear. But we will see it in a moment. I want to say something about this painting over here. I would prefer to have a frontal view of the painting, but we acquired this painting very, very shortly after I inaugurated as director, because I knew very little about Korean art, but even knowing very little, I knew that this painting was very important. And it went into auction in Hong Kong, and I asked my curators to get it. I thought it represented the wife and the daughter of the painter, whose name I can't remember right now. I have to excuse. I have to ask for your comprehension. I can't remember the name. But it's this is in the early 40s, 38 or 41, I think. It represents a woman dressed in somehow westernized dress, and the daughter is also listening to a record, playing in a record player. And the artist was deaf. So I thought that there is another story about this artist and this painting, but it would take too long to describe it. Listening to music appears to be a theme, and women reading appears also at that moment. Women didn't have education before; they didn't read. So in a way, not only women become a subject of representation, but also their activity, their intellectual activity is new. This is a section dedicated to the education of women, by the way. Some new works also were commissioned within this very historical reading of the process, and here is a section about a genre in Korean art that existed also in Japan, and that is embroidery. Embroidery was an artistic genre as well, and here we have an example of how abstract art, how the language of cubism and abstract art that arrived in Korea through the Japanese education and artists also affects or expresses itself through this technique that the West considers craftsmanship. And these are the case of 4 women that were new women, that meaning pioneers in the social advance of the role of women. There was a writer, an activist, a dancer, and 2 actresses that are considered examples of behavior and characters that represented those changes in the society. This is a very interesting character. She was a dancer that introduced modern dance in Korea before the war, and after the Korean War she defected to the north. This is a painting done by a Korean artist who was born in Russia, was educated under Stalin, and was sent to Pyongyang to create the Pyongyang Art Academy in 1953. And she is considered a hero in North Korea. This is an example of a big commission. Im Hun-sung is a young Korean artist. You may know his work since it was awarded the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennial of 2015. He's a filmmaker. And this is a big commission like our Turbine Hall project, in which he addressed a very complex page of the Korean history, told through the lives and through the voices of 3 women. It was interesting that this show coincided with the arrival of new women, because these 3 women lived different periods of the Korean history. I think they are already all dead. Some of them, one of them lived through 3 different wars. One of them lived the Korean War, then she lived the Vietnam War, and she moved to Iraq, where she lived the Iran-Iraq War. It's very, the exhibition or that piece deals with precisely the voice of those who didn't win the battle. Normally, as Walter Benjamin said, the history is written by those who win the wars, but the voices of those who don't win is somehow also exists, but it doesn't have a place. Oh, I think I did. Okay. These are part of the exhibition is the clothes of this lady that were displayed. these are the belongings of another of the characters, another of the women. And the third one, I don't have it in the image, but the film is 3 films in installation plus the references to the lives of these 3 women and the process of making the entire project. This is an exhibition that we opened 2 weeks ago. How little you know about me, it refers to the Asianness, what is to be Asian today. And the curator is one of our one of the youngest curators in the museum. It's very interesting to see how, bringing together artists from different Asian regions, she has been able to address issues that her senior colleagues could consider completely taboo or not appropriate. Taboo is maybe a big word, but I won't be able to describe each of the works, but this exhibition also answers, I'm going backwards, excuse me, answers also our policy of looking at Asian context as our natural universe and bringing together artists from these different regions made this one of the most complex. It's one of the biggest exhibitions we have done. This feels exactly like somehow documenta in a way, by its dimension, the quality of the works, the issues being treated. This is the work by a Filipino artist who is making a kind of a tableau vivant of the modern history of the Filipino society, but underwater, as if it was a parade underwater. And this is also by an artist from Indonesia that deals precisely with the colonial history of his country and the traditions, the local traditions of order and law. Well, as usual, I put together too many images, and we're running out of time already. But this is an exhibition that we made at the beginning of 2016 in order to introduce other developments of modern art that are not those canonical ones that have taken place in the traditional centers of power, Paris, New York, and nowadays London, Berlin, have traditionally dictated and continue dictating the canon in art, and we want to start talking about developments of modern art and certainly contemporary art that, while being affected by these centers, have developed independently, and what the difference in the definition of modern art will help us also define Korean modern art, because the vocabularies and the chronologies that are used in that no longer match the vocabulary and the chronologies of the metropolises. This is the case of the Egyptian surrealists, which is certainly an evolution of the surrealist movement, but that circulated through very different paths. And we did that because at the time we wanted to do an exhibition on Korean surrealism. We lost the curator on the way, and we're going to be a bit late with it. But we did this exhibition precisely to start looking at other developments of modern art. This is an exhibition that I saw in 2014 when I was just a visitor to the museum. It was with the collections of MMCA, and it has, like most of the exhibitions that our chief curator, Ms. Kang Sung-wan, organizes, very creative and suggestive titles. Uproarious, Heated, Inundated refers to 3 different moments of the modern history of Korea. The uproarious identifies the Korean War, the tensions that bring the country to the Civil War of 1950-1953 and the immediate post-war and the current division. Heated wants to mean the fast industrialization and urbanization that followed from the 60s to today and transformed a country that in 1953 was among the poorest in the world, brought it to be the 11th economy in the world nowadays, in very, very short 50 years. So, and inundated refers to the post-1989 Korean with the openness and globalization of the Korean culture. There is a big difference in the generations of artists of the different periods, especially after '89. There is a big cut in interests, qualities, languages, materials, discourses. Now, I believe that if we want to stick to the plan of maximum an hour of presentation, I should try to focus now, and I will show just some images at random, but I will try to focus on some ideas of what am I trying to do, what are we trying to do in the museum. I mentioned in the beginning the three main mandates that I received from the Ministry of Culture, and my answer was, let's make a museum based on discourse and research. If you don't have the icons, museums can be iconic or based on discourse. And normally, the top ones do both things at the same time. MoMA is MoMA because it has the collection, but it also because it does things with the collection. It says things with the collection that are of global relevance, or that they become of global relevance. Our collections are mainly Korean. They're very little known, and still we have many gaps. So I said, let's focus on the creation of discourse and narratives, and to do that we need to research. We need to make the brain work. So we created the Department of Research and Publications, and among other things, but that was a very significant bet for the new identity of the museum. The identity of the museum would depend on precisely a clear discourse and the specialization of each of the venues. Doksugung is where we focus on modern art. Kwachon is where we focus on Korean art and also some international art, but we play with the collection mainly. And in MCA Seoul, we play with everything else. And these are images also of the 30th anniversary of the Gwachon Kwan. Again, another suggestive title of the exhibition, As the Moon Waxes and Wanes, is a way to define how time operates, but it's not a solar time, it's not a masculine time, it is a feminine time, and it is a nocturnal time. And it's very much, the Korean popular culture still uses the lunar calendar. So our new year is in February. I mean, the 1st of January is a holiday, but nothing else. The big New Year celebration is in February, when the Lunar New Year. What else? I am European. I'm becoming Korean, but I am still European. And as such, I believe that the museum, the modern museum, has a very strong connection with democracy. The modern museum was founded in the 15th century in Italy, in Rome, when after discovering so many examples of the lost civilization of Rome and Greece, the powerful created the museum in order to reconnect with that lost civilization, and the the building in which they located these sculptures, the artworks from the lost civilization they wanted to reconnect, was a recreation of the forum, of the public space where the citizens in the ancient Rome came together to discuss about the things that matter in the political life. That is the beginning of the modern museum, and as such, that the contemporary museum is also a place where citizens come to exchange. So, MMCA is developing towards what I call a porous museum. Porous is the little holes in our skin that allow the communication between the outside and the inside. And porous means that museums are not solid, are full of accesses through which people can come in and get out. So it's a place of transit, it's a place of experience, but especially it's a place of engagement. To make that also, the museum is no longer a place where you go to look at objects. It is a place where people go to do many different things at the same time. And I have many notes that I could use, but I will start synthesizing in order to leave time for a bit more conversation, because otherwise my monologue is too long, and we can talk about all of these things. But a museum like this one is a place where the visitors that have so many different interests have to have those different interests satisfied at the same time. So in a way, we program the museum, but we consider that the museum is also the place where the visitor programs itself what it wants. We still know very little, too little, about our audiences, about what they do, what they need, what they want, what they feel. And so I am creating also a nervous system by which the museum can listen to the user and can talk back. And that becomes a conversation. It is no longer a monologue, it is an exchange. These are examples of works that were, and this was a great work by E. Bull, a fabulous Korean artist that is preparing a great exhibition soon at the Hayward Gallery in London. This is not part of the exhibition. This has been in the museum since 1988. This is a great Namjoon Paik work that was done for the Olympic Games. And we just shut it down because the machinery, the equipment, is the original one. So there are certain risks associated with it. But it's a fabulous artwork that needs restoration. I think that a great opportunity, why I feel so privileged to, oops, what have I done? What happens? Yeah, okay. Why I feel so privileged to do this work is because we can interrogate again what modern art means and what is the relationship between whatever we call modern, the present, and the future. And that would be another lecture. Probably I can't go in detail about it. These are images of works that were installed in the MMCA Seoul at its opening. We just received the donation of this work by artist So Do-ho. Interrogating what modern means and what is the relationship between the recent past and the present will allow us to imagine the future, because I think the ultimate reason for the museum, and especially the Museum of Contemporary Art, is to allow to imagine different other possible worlds. I will conclude with these images of the 1938 opening of the Doksugung Museum, which received the name of the Yi Royal Family Museum. The Yi was a family of collectors, and again, these are the images of the former residency of the emperor. This is where the Japanese modern art was presented. And it wasn't until 1986 that Korea as a country started collecting systematically its artists. So the museum, as I mentioned, it was built as a museum of modern art, but the Korean artists were excluded. It's very important. These are images of the craft and archaeological objects displayed in the Doksugung in the extension, and these are some examples of Korean modern art that have, of course, until 1945, artists are trained in Japan. I think that with this I will start concluding, because, as I said, going into detail into this next exhibition would be the subject of another lecture that I would love to give, but it is not what was planning, what the intention was today. I hope that I have, in a not too chaotic way, I have contributed to give you a picture of what I said. It is a pioneering museum of modern contemporary art in Asia, also one of the biggest of its kind in the world, and with a brilliant present and even a much brilliant future, because it, for two reasons. One is that Korea has the most interesting artistic scene in Asia, in my opinion, and part of the world as well. The second is that the Korean society is extraordinarily interested in what is new. And that, in my opinion, gives us, makes MMCA a great opportunity to play with that curiosity and that need to be central in the life of the Korean society. Thank you.
Bartomeu, thank you very much for a very interesting, very detailed presentation. So without further ado, I open it Q&A, and if you have any question, comment, please raise your hands, and I will come to you with a microphone. So yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on two things which seem like extremely interesting to me. First one is you said that first, before coming crazy about being global, you prefer to like research on what is local, and locality you understand as Asian. Yeah, so if you could tell us a little bit about if you came already as a museum, as a team, to some conclusions thanks to your projects, or you are rather at the stage of asking questions still. And the other thing that really interested me is this concept of porous museum, yeah, which sounds really exciting, and maybe if you could also say like a few or three words more on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The modern history of Korea is very dense and it's dramatic, and is very much rooted into the fate of the region. So what I realized is that our collections and our program had very little relationship with its surrounding context. In a very simplifying way, I could describe the collection, and I have described the collection colloquially as a collection that is mainly 99% Korean artists, a handful of artists from the United States, a handful of artists from Europe, one Japanese artist and one Chinese artist. So even if in the past there were attempts to open up the program to the neighboring contexts, it's not represented in the collection and it's not visible in the program. So I oblige the curators to travel. I'll send them to visit, not all of them, but some of them. And we have initiated as well conversations with artists of different regions for commissions, for exhibitions, for acquisitions, and that is a big priority. Conclusions, not yet. One of them, again, I am European, and as Europeans of my generation, and probably of later generations, we have been educated without any reference and any knowledge about Asia. If you're not a super specialist in Asia, you probably don't know much about the modern history or even the ancient history of that part of the world. So I'm not going to pretend I'm a specialist, but one thing that is surprising is that the generational divide or division that I can see in the Korean society is very similar in other societies, and that for different reasons, history and the way the society reacts to events is quite similar in different Asian contexts. For instance, in the 1980s, the generation of artists that bloom or blossom at the moment are very strongly politically engaged. In Korea, they're called Minjung artists, Minjung Misul. And Minjung is a word that you can translate like of the people. That means an art that is very strongly engaged in the liberation movements and the democratization movements. Korea is, until 1986, a succession of military dictatorships, and the transition to democracy begins in 1986. With a very important openness in 1989, as I mentioned before. Well, you have very similar developments of Minjung Misul in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and in Southeast Asia. Why exactly? I don't know, but you can trace those lines in perspective, and it becomes very evident. We're doing a big exhibition actually with Japan, with Singapore, and we're trying to manage also to include China in it, which is not easy. It's not easy at all. But this is a coming exhibition for 2019, so conclusions not yet, but it's very interesting, because at the same time, if you compare it with what was going on in the 80s in the East, or in the countries under the communist regimes, you have a lot of similarities as well. But anyway, that's another lecture. The Porous Museum combines two ideas. One is that instead of being a stone that is very heavy and that you know you can do little against it, very solid, very compact. The museum is like a sponge. The museum is an institution that needs to be able to absorb everything and to give back everything. That is one idea. The other idea is that the skin is part of the nervous system. If our skin is an instrument with which we're in contact with the world. Tactile sense is we do through the skin and the nervous system, of course. But so the idea that the museum should have a sensibility and should be able to touch and be touched is very important. It's a metaphor, of course, but it's also reality. We are experimenting a lot, especially in MMCA Seoul. We are experimenting a lot with visitors' behavior, and I have also created another department that has a stranger. Well, it's a combination of two departments that have the mission of finding out what happens to people in the museum. So they are the skin of the museum because, in my opinion, the museum did not have contact with the audience, with the user in that sense.
Is there any other question from, yes?
So you keep mentioning China and Japan as the leaders in Asian art, but what about Southeast Asia? Are you planning on collaborations with them or not? Do you see any potential in Southeast?
Yes. No, I didn't want to mention China and Japan as leaders of anything, but as immediate neighbors. And traditionally also, or historically, having developed predating attitudes towards Korea in different moments of history. We have a lot of relationship with Southeast Asia, and how little you know about me includes many artists from the region. The exhibition I mentioned on that we're doing with the Japan Foundation, the National Gallery of Singapore, includes also a lot of artists from that region. We are beginning to collect artists from different countries of the region: Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and so on. Taiwan, certainly. It's on the way. We're moving towards that. Yes, we are aware that M+ Museum in Hong Kong is much more advanced than us, but since their building is not ready yet, it's not so visible. But we know that they have done a great collection. The collection of the National Gallery of Singapore is also very interesting in that sense, although they are, for the moment, they are also kind of leading the representation or the discourse on Southeast Asian art, and so we don't pretend to be neither the first nor the best, but we'd like to play with them along these lines, indeed.
Yes.
I'm wondering about your perspective about Korean art. So how could you describe maybe the potential of the Korean contemporary art or characteristic?
Very good. It's not possible for me to give one answer to that question, especially because I'm still learning about Korean art. I have powerful intuitions. I'm convinced of the great complexity and quality of the Korean art in different moments, of history, especially in the contemporary side, but I cannot articulate precise answers to that, especially because I still miss something that is the following. The museum has traditionally focused on individual artists, and even if there have been many group shows, I have not found, and I'm not able yet to give a solid answer to the question, what does connect the artists through time? What would be that narrative that would explain not the Korean-ness of the Korean art, but what is the narrative that explains how art depicts and represents the movement of the spirit and the culture and the history of Korea. And the exhibition, Uproarious, Heated, Inundated, was the best formulation that I could see, but there was no catalog. There is no trace of that. And even the documentation, in my opinion, it could be better. I have a very complex memory of the exhibition that I cannot recreate with the images that the museum kept from it. So that's what we're trying to work. Maybe it's an endless process. It's a project that it will never end. We'll all our life will be trying to do it, and we will never finish. And the good thing about it is that the next generation, those who come after us, will do it again and will do it differently. Each generation has to rewrite the book over and over and over again, and in a way, precisely one area in which we can improve a lot is in that of generating bibliography. There is still a lot of pages to be written, and I believe that the world right now is ready to welcome those new pages of containing other definitions and other expressions of whatever modern and contemporary means. One of my notes is in the conclusion was, is there something that we could call the global conversation in the art system nowadays? We believe that yes, there is a global conversation going on. Yet at the same time, I think that no, there is no global conversation yet. It's an idea, but it's not a fact. Maybe, we can discuss a lot about it, but that's how I see it and why I find it so fascinating.
Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question? So maybe last but not least, I would like to ask about two things. One is regarding what you said in the early beginning, that you see the role of the museum, modern and contemporary art museum, and a significant role of introduce or overcome the Western powerful discourse regarding the history of art, modern art and avant-garde. And one of my question is how you'll introduce that through the publications. And the second one is regarding these other modernisms and avant-garde. What is behind this strategy to introduce, for instance, the Egyptian surrealism? Is it the mirroring the otherness in modern art against the Western powerful discourse, or is it something, some new exotic approach to describe the Korean modern and avant-garde art?
Very good questions indeed. I worked most of my life in Central Europe, but before going to Korea, I was for 11 years at a museum in Barcelona that was located in a double periphery. It was located in the periphery of Europe, meaning in the southern border, so to say, and remember that until very recently there was a popular say that went, Europe finishes in the Pyrenees Mountains, meaning the Iberian Peninsula is part of Africa. And then within the Iberian Peninsula and within the Spanish territory, Barcelona is also on the periphery because it's on the eastern side of it. And that condition of double periphery, although being in Europe, which is very clear, within a capitalistic liberal system, gave it a condition that demanded the development of a narrative and a discourse and a program and an identity that had to be different than the traditional canon. Even if Paris, it's very close by, and London is, Europe. In Europe, everything is close by. So, out of that experience, the need comes the consciousness that it is needed for the Korean the establishment of the narratives of the Korean modern art. We need to redevelop a specific vocabulary, and we need to clarify a timeline or the chronological references that explain that. The vocabulary and the chronology were also, this is also part of my heritage when funding the Internationale Consortium of Museums that we did with the Moderna Gallery of Ljubljana and the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven in Holland and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Antwerp and so on. It was exactly the same problem. So I didn't, that is where the idea comes from. The discourses that are generated and provide identity have to try to answer that need. On the second part of your question, I would say that certainly the last thing that I was interested in when doing the Egyptian Surrealism exhibition was exoticism. I think that was the last thing that I could consider. It was important because it was an opportunity. I mean, we did that because we had the opportunity of doing it, and we worked with the Sharjah Art Foundation, who organized the exhibition in Cairo first, and we just brought it because at the time we were beginning to work on the same type of exhibition for Korea. So instead of going again to the original surrealism with which the Korean surrealism had very little contact with, because modern art and the avant-gardes arrive in Korea through the Japanese. And in my opinion, Japanese embraced modern languages, but at the time, it was not easy to digest the avant-gardes. And certainly surrealism was an uncomfortable avant-garde because of its links to communism and the political implications. And in my view, the Japanese embraced the languages of modern art from the West, but they also kind of repulse, for political reasons, many avant-garde developments, so that there is no reason to pretend that there was a direct connection. While in the Egyptian case, there were many direct connections because the Egyptian artists traveled to Paris and met directly with Breton and Aragon and all these people. So it was a combination of opportunity and try to create a context that would allow us, and this is something that connects. It's typical in the French surrealism or in the European surrealism, the Egyptian surrealism, and the Korean surrealism. Still many people think that, or would sustain, there is no surrealist art in Korea. But what is common is that in the same period, the relationship between visual artists and poets and people in the literary field are very strong. That is something very clear. And it hasn't been researched much. There is also, according to some specialists, there is a very interesting practice of surrealist photography in that period, from the 30s to the Korean War, so to say. Most people never heard of it or never saw it, so it's clear it's never been researched properly. So that was the motivation.
Thank you very much. Is there any more questions or comments? If not, thank you once again for your...
Thank you very much.
For your lecture and visit. Thank you all for coming. And last but not least, if you are interested more into Korean culture, the context of Korean identity, cultural identity, I will welcome you all for the next week lecture about modernism and cultural identity as a part of a project which we established with Korean Culture Center in Warsaw. At the counter and the entrance there are leaflets with more detailed program for the series of lectures. Once again, thank you very much and hope to see you soon.